Let Wild Animals Be Wild by David Bowles. Many people feel a responsibility to protect and care for Earth's living creatures. People take action in many ways that either directly or indirectly benefit wildlife. One of the direct ways that we protect wildlife is by raising endangered wild animals in captivity to ensure their survival. Another way that we directly protect wildlife is by treating injured wild animals and rehabilitating them in captivity. The goal of both actions should be to release animals back into the wild where they belong. For endangered or injured animals, the benefits of living under human protection are clear. Animals in zoos and sanctuaries have plenty of food and water. They're safe from predators. They aren't threatened by hunting, environmental pollution, and habitat destruction. For endangered species, every death in the wild means another step toward extinction. If even a few members of an endangered species are successfully raised in captivity, hope for the species stays alive. But keeping animals alive in captivity is not the final purpose of conservation. Real success comes when animals are plentiful and strong enough to return to their natural habitat. Only then can an ecosystem be in balance. An ecosystem is all the animals and plants that live in a certain area. Here's one such success story. The California condor is one of the largest flying birds in the world. It was once found in many parts of the United States, but during the past 2 centuries, the species diminished. Settlers shot and poisoned the condors and took their eggs. Hunting condors was outlawed more than 100 years ago. However, their numbers continued to fall because of pollution, pesticide use, and other threats. Finally, by the 1970s, scientists discovered that only a few dozen wild condors were left. In the early 1980s, the U.S. government started a program to keep the condor from going extinct. Scientists began to collect wild condor eggs and hatch them in zoos. They also captured some condors. They kept these condors in zoos so they could lay eggs and raise their young in safety. By 1987, there were no more condors left in the wild. However, there were 27 California condors in captivity. All along, the plan was to raise them and release condors back into the wild. No one was sure if it would work, but it did. By the end of 2015, the total population of California condors was up to 435. That included 268 condors living in their natural habitat, once again soaring through the skies. Returning wild animals to the wild is good for both animals and people. Let's start with animals. Imagine a bird that was forever kept from flying free. Or what if a wildcat can never prowl the savanna? Wild animals such as these may be safe and protected under human care, but they can truly thrive only in the wild, where their natural instincts and behaviors are unfettered. All of nature benefits when an endangered species is restored to its habitat. Many studies have shown the enormous effect even one species has on an ecosystem. This is particularly true of what are known as keystone species. A keystone species is an animal or plant that plays an essential role in an ecosystem. If that species becomes extinct or even threatened, the ecosystem is threatened. That's because other living things depend on that species for their own survival. Beavers are a keystone species in the United States and Europe. Beavers use logs and sticks to build dams in rivers and streams. Their dams and the pools that form behind them become habitats for many other animals. For example, ducks, otters, and dragonflies may live there. When beavers became extinct in Scotland and other parts of Europe due to hunting, other animal populations suffered as well. In 2009, beavers were reintroduced to wild areas of Scotland, where they were monitored through 2014. Biologists declared the program an outstanding success. The first several generations of beavers thrived and had a positive impact on the environment. Animals can benefit in another way when they are released to the wild. Scientists have begun to put tracking devices on animals raised in captivity and on injured animals rehabilitated in captivity before returning both groups to their habitats. The devices allow scientists to follow the animals' movements and to study their behaviors. Information gathered helps us better understand and protect species. The Siberian tiger, found mainly in the far east of Russia, is one of many threatened species that has benefited from tracking. Starting in the 1990s, members of the Siberian Tiger Project, based at the University of Idaho, began to catch Siberian tigers. They fitted the big cats with radio collars. Then they released the tigers. Scientists have been monitoring the tigers for decades, gathering valuable data. Wildlife workers use the information to help them effectively treat and release injured tigers. Scientists also hope to reintroduce Siberian tigers into areas where they have disappeared, such as northern Korea. Ongoing monitoring will ensure the tigers have the resources they need to thrive. Releasing captive animals into the wild also makes financial sense. Many people will travel almost anywhere to see animals. Therefore, reintroducing animals to a wilderness area brings in tourists, and tourists spend money. For example, wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park starting in 1995. A 2006 study by the University of Montana estimated that wolf-related tourists, people who visit Yellowstone primarily to see wolves, brought in tens of millions of dollars each year. That money helps Yellowstone. It also helps surrounding businesses, such as motels and restaurants. Some people argue against releasing animals back into the wild. For one thing, they say animals raised or rehabilitated in captivity can't survive on their own. However, scientists are learning more and more about wild animals' needs to live independently. Wildlife biologists and other specialists carefully prepare animals for life in the wild before releasing them. In the end, of course, the animals have to fend for themselves, but that's nature's way. Other people say that reintroducing predators to the wild is bad for humans. They might attack us. They might attack livestock. The animals that live in a balanced ecosystem with adequate food and space rarely hurt people or livestock. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reported that of all cattle that died in 2010, only about 5% were killed by predators. An ecosystem needs all animals, predator and prey alike, to stay in balance. Humans have the power to save and protect species. We also have the responsibility to let wild animals be wild and live according to their instincts. Releasing animals back into nature, whenever possible, is the best course of action for them, for us, and for Earth. Don't release animals back to the wild. Sometimes wildlife needs a helping hand. Biologists and conservationists often rescue orphaned, injured, or endangered animals. It's the only way to ensure their survival. Helping animals may require keeping them in captivity for weeks, months, or even years. Endangered species, in particular, may need to stay in captivity for extended periods. That way, they can begin to rebuild their population. Then what? One argument is that wild animals always should be released back to the wild. However, scientific research raises serious questions about the benefits of doing so. For several reasons, it makes more sense to keep these animals in captivity. For one thing, many animals that have been kept in captivity simply can't survive in the wild. This is especially true of animals that were born in captivity or raised in captivity from an early age. All animals are born with certain instincts or natural abilities. These instincts help them to survive. But animals also learn important survival skills after they're born from their parents or other members of their species. These may include how to hunt for food, recognize enemies, and cooperate with others. When orphaned or injured animals are raised in captivity, they miss out on this learning process. Therefore, when these animals are released into the wild, they are poorly equipped to survive. Scientists of the Animal Behavior Research Group at the University of Exeter, England, examined the survival rates of animals released in the wild. The scientists studied 45 cases that involved 17 different species. The species included wolves, bears, foxes, African wild dogs, and otters. The first group was made up of animals born in captivity and released into the wild. The second group was made up of animals caught in the wild and moved to a new area. The scientists found that the animals born in captivity had a much lower survival rate in the wild. these animals were more likely to starve to death. That's because they lacked hunting skills. The captive-born animals were also less likely to find mates and start families. That means their species as a whole was less likely to thrive. The captive-born animals were also less likely to avoid dangerous situations. Captive-born animals have less natural fear of other large carnivores, said researcher Kirsten Jewell. She noted that animals that are more bold, particularly towards humans, are more likely to die. African hunting dogs raised in captivity, for example, were frequently attacked by lions. Many African hunting dogs were also hunted or trapped by humans after their release into the wild. Animals that are captured rather than born in captivity also face peril when they're released back into the wild. One example is Keiko, the orca that starred in the movie Free Willy. Keiko was captured from the North Atlantic Ocean near Iceland. At the time, he was about 3 years old. After Free Willy, people around the world pushed to have Keiko released to the wild. The campaign succeeded. First, Keiko was returned to Iceland. There he lived in a huge pen in the ocean. Scientists helped Keiko regain his health after years living in poor conditions. They took him out on ocean walks so he could get used to the open ocean. They even introduced him to wild orcas. Finally, in July 2002, he was released into the wild. But Keiko was unable to integrate into or join a wild orca group. Scientists believe this is key to orcas' health in the wild. Keiko died alone in December 2003. Here's the second reason it makes sense to keep captive wild animals in captivity rather than release them to the wild. Many modern zoos and other facilities offer everything these animals need to live long, healthy, and happy lives, and in many cases, nature does not. Some people object to keeping animals in zoos. They compare zoo life to life in prison, but their objections may be based on outdated ideas. The bare, concrete spaces and small cages of the past have given way to far more natural enclosures. Many zoo designers now focus on behavioral enrichment. That means giving animals choices about where to go and what to do. In well-designed zoos, animals can roam large spaces that feature dirt, trees, and other plants, and water. Moats or ditches have replaced cages and wire fences. Animals can climb, burrow, or simply stretch out and nap. They can do what comes naturally. Zoo personnel also provide toys and activities to prevent boredom. Animals have private space too. They aren't always in view of visitors. In some important ways, zoos and sanctuaries improve on nature. In captivity, animals can always eat well. Their food intake doesn't depend on their hunting skills. It doesn't vary according to the season or other environmental factors. Captive animals don't need to compete for scarce resources. They do not fear predators, hunters, or speeding cars. They won't lose their habitat to human development. Regular vet visits keep them healthy, and if animals reproduce in captivity, their babies will be born into and raised in a safe environment. This is particularly important for animals whose species are dwindling in the wild, or entire species that no longer exist in the wild. The International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, lists 33 species as extinct in the wild. 31 of these species remain alive and well in zoos, aquariums, and other facilities. In many cases, these animals can't survive in the wild due to habitat destruction, poaching, or other factors. In captivity, they get the care they need to thrive. Individual endangered animals also may be rescued, taken to zoos or sanctuaries, nursed back to health, and kept in safe surroundings. For example, the Jungle Place in Quintana Roo, Mexico, provides food, shelter, medical care, and attention to rescued spider monkeys. The monkeys were victims of illegal pet trade, poaching, and habitat loss. There's no longer any safe wild environment for them in Mexico. Sanctuaries such as the Jungle Place keep these monkeys safe. There's a third reason to keep rescued wild animals in captivity rather than releasing them back into the wild. Both scientists and the general public can learn a great deal from captive animals. Carefully observing captive animals allows scientists to make discoveries about species health and behavior that they can't make in the wild. What scientists learn about captive animals can benefit other members of the species that remain in the wild. Seeing wild animals in captivity also helps people appreciate wildlife and wildlife protection efforts. People are more likely to contribute to conservation organizations after seeing a member of an endangered species up close. That's unlikely to happen in the wild. Zoos, sanctuaries, and similar places also offer signs, guides, lectures, and other information to educate people about the animals living there. In October 2014, the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California rescued an orphaned sea otter. She was part of a population of threatened Southern California otters. The pup was thought to be less than a week old. She was far too young to be without her mother. Staff cared for the pup for a month. Then they moved her to the Shed Aquarium in Chicago, Illinois, and named her Luna. They knew they couldn't release Luna to the sea. Pups learn most of their survival skills from their mothers. Luna missed out on this learning stage. She wouldn't last long in the wild. Luna soon became a huge attraction for the public and the media. Tim Bender oversees the aquarium's animal care and its rescue program. He refers to Luna as an ambassador for her species and her ecosystem. Bender says Luna reminds us that what we do on land has repercussions on the ocean environment and the animals that live there, inspiring us to make a difference. By studying Luna, scientists at Shed have learned important information about sea otters and how to care for them. For example, they now know the exact calorie intake and activity levels an otter needs to grow to full size. Scientists can use such information to help sea otters in the wild. In some cases, captive wild animals can and should be released to the wild. For example, if a sick or injured animal can be treated quickly, it can probably be released with little risk. However, for many captive animals, release is not worth the risk. Captivity offers safety, health, and well-being. It may even save entire species. For animals in peril, these benefits far outweigh freedom.